The rain fell mercilessly over the city, while Jason remained under the awning of the business building, observing the dark sky torn by lightning. Tall, with an elegant bearing and eyes that carried the weight of many difficult decisions, the 40-year-old millionaire adjusted the gold watch on his wrist and sighed deeply. The meeting had been exhausting, but he had finally managed to close the deal that could expand his financial empire beyond what he had ever imagined. While waiting for his driver, Jason felt that familiar feeling of emptiness that success had never managed to fill. All this money, all these million-dollar deals, and yet I returned to an empty house with no one to share these victories with, he thought, adjusting the impeccable suit he wore. The driver finally arrived, apologizing for the delay due to the storm that had transformed the streets into small rivers. Jason merely nodded and entered the luxurious car, leaning back on the leather seat, while observing the raindrops running down the window. That's when his eyes caught a small and fragile figure on the opposite sidewalk, a girl who couldn't be more than 11 years old, completely soaked, holding something in her arms with desperate protection. "Stop the car," Jason ordered the driver, who looked at him confused through the rearview mirror. "Stop the car right now, that girl. She's carrying babies in this storm." His voice came out louder than he intended, moved by an impulse that even he didn't understand. Crossing the street under the torrential rain without caring about his Italian suit, Jason approached the girl, who was now huddling under a small awning of a closed shop. Her black hair was stuck to her pale face, and her lips trembled from cold, but her eyes showed a fierce determination as she protected the two small bundles she carried. "Do you need help, little one?" asked Jason, bending down to be at the girl's height, noticing the two babies she was trying to protect from the rain with her own body. "Please, sir, help them. They're very sick." "I've been knocking on all doors, but no one wants to help three beggars," replied the girl with a choked voice, revealing the babies who were coughing violently. The little beggar, with worn and wet clothes, looked at Jason with a mixture of distrust and hope. Valerie was her name, she said between sobs, while explaining that the twins, a boy and a girl, had very high fever for 2 days. The little ones didn't seem to be more than 6 months old, and their faces were red with fever, their fragile bodies trembling even under the damp blankets. "I've been begging for help at pharmacies, clinics, but they say they need money and documents. I have nothing but these blankets to protect them," said Valerie, her large dark eyes brimming with tears that mixed with the rain running down her face. Jason's heart tightened in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. There was something about these babies, something in this girl's eyes that awakened in him an instinctive, almost visceral protection. "Come with me, Valerie. I'm taking you to a hospital right now," he said, extending his arms to help. That's when the smaller baby, the girl, began to convulse, her tiny body trembling violently in Valerie's arms, who screamed desperately, "Help! She's dying! Please don't let her die, sir!" begged Valerie, grabbing Jason's suit sleeve tightly, her eyes reflecting a fear so deep that it cut through the businessman's heart like a knife. In the car on the way to the hospital, Jason held one of the babies while Valerie cradled the other, humming a lullaby with a trembling voice. The driver drove as fast as he could through the slippery streets, casting concerned glances through the rearview mirror at his boss, who had always been so reserved and now seemed distressed by the situation of those children. "Don't worry, little one. We're going to save them. I promise I'll do everything in my power," Jason said to Valerie, but his eyes were fixed on the small face of the baby in his arms. "I've never seen such a sick baby. It seems like life is draining from them with each passing minute," he thought, feeling an anguish growing in his chest, a sensation that these children were somehow connected to him, although he couldn't explain how. Arriving at the hospital, Jason carried both babies in his arms while Valerie ran beside him, her wet footsteps leaving marks on the white, sterile floor. "I need help immediately. These children are dying," he shouted, his normally controlled voice now loaded with urgency and authority. Doctors and nurses rushed toward her, taking the babies and placing them on small stretchers, connecting tubes and devices, while rapidly speaking medical terms that sounded like a foreign language to Valerie. "Will they be okay? Please tell me you'll save them," the girl begged, holding Jason's hand tightly, tears now flowing freely down her face, dirty with dust and rain. Hours passed in the hospital corridor, with Jason providing dry clothes for Valerie and warm food, while they waited for news. The girl told her story between timid bites of the sandwich he had bought her. She wasn't the baby's sister, but had found them abandoned in a deteriorated house 3 months ago, and since then had been caring for them as if they were her own siblings, surviving on handouts on the streets. "They're all I have in the world, sir. When I found them, they were so tiny, crying alone in that house. I couldn't leave them there, even though I'm just a girl with nothing to offer," Valerie confessed, her eyes filled with a wisdom no child should possess. "You have an enormous heart, Valerie. What you did for these babies." "Many adults wouldn't have such courage," Jason responded, impressed by the strength of that small soul. Finally, a doctor approached them, with a serious but relieved expression. He informed them that the babies were stable, although in critical condition: severe pneumonia, malnutrition, dehydration. They would need days of intensive treatment, but the outlook was good thanks to how quickly they were brought in. Jason, using his influence and fortune, ensured the best possible treatment for the children, impressing even the hospital director, who came personally to thank him for his generosity. "I don't want you to spare any resources. These children deserve every chance to survive and recover the health that was denied to them," Jason stated with conviction, a strange sensation growing inside him, as if he was finally doing something truly meaningful with his money for the first time in years. When they were finally allowed to see the babies, now clean, medicated, and sleeping in small cribs surrounded by machines, Jason felt such intense emotion that he had to lean against the wall to avoid staggering. The doctor, noticing his reaction, invited him for a private conversation in a small adjacent room. "Mr. Jason, there's something peculiar about these babies that I'd like to show you," said the doctor, leading him to a small crib where the baby boy was sleeping peacefully. Carefully, the doctor lifted the child's small wrist, revealing a very particular birthmark, a small star-shaped mole on the inside of the wrist. "The girl has the same mark, exactly in the same place. It's quite unusual, a very specific genetic characteristic," the doctor explained, carefully observing Jason's reaction. The millionaire felt the air escape from his lungs. He knew that peculiar mark, had seen countless times that same little star-shaped mole on Caroline's wrist, his great love from the past who had mysteriously disappeared. "It can't be," he whispered, remembering the moments when he joked with Caroline about that mark, saying that their children would inherit that lucky star. "Doctor, how old would you say these babies are?" asked Jason, his voice almost unrecognizable with emotion. 3 days later, the enormous gate of Jason's mansion opened to receive the luxurious automobile where he, Valerie, and the now-recovered twin babies were traveling. As the car made its way down the avenue lined with century-old trees, Valerie looked in wonder through the window, her childish eyes wide at the grandeur of the property. The meticulously maintained gardens, the imposing fountain in the center of the lawn, and finally the colonial-style mansion that rose majestically at the end of the path. The girl, who had never seen such opulence, firmly held Jason's hand as if fearing that all of this was just a dream about to dissipate. In the last few days, the millionaire had remained at the hospital, ensuring that the babies received the best possible treatment and surprising everyone with his paternal dedication to children who, theoretically, had nothing to do with him. "It's like a palace from fairy tales. The children deserve to live in a place like this, mister." "Jason, not on the streets where I found them, shivering with cold and hunger," exclaimed Valerie, looking at the babies sleeping in the special seats that Jason had arranged for transport. Jason's cheerful expression quickly transformed upon seeing Dorothy's elegant figure standing at the top of the marble staircase that led to the main entrance. Tall, slender, with impeccably arranged black hair and an elegant dress that accentuated her aristocratic figure, the 50-year-old woman looked at the car with an expression of evident displeasure. She had been his stepmother since he was 10, when his adoptive father, Richard, had been widowed and brought her to the mansion, and since then, their relationship had always been marked by a false cordiality that masked mutual resentment. "Prepare to meet my stepmother, Valerie. Dorothy is not an affectionate person, but this house is mine and you are my guests. No one can expel you from here until I discover the whole truth about these babies," Jason assured, gently squeezing the shoulder of the girl, who now looked apprehensively at the woman on the staircase. Getting out of the car with one of the babies in his arms while the driver helped Valerie with the other, Jason climbed the steps, facing Dorothy with determination. What an unpleasant surprise you bring us, Jason. First you disappear for days without explanation, and now you arrive with beggars? Have you turned our house into a charity institution now? Dorothy inquired in a venomous tone, her cold eyes scanning Valerie from head to toe, as if evaluating a repulsive object. Her gaze lingered on the babies with even more disdain, and she instinctively took a step back, as if fearing contamination. They are my guests, Dorothy, and they will stay as long as necessary. This girl Valerie saved these babies from abandonment. She's a heroine, not a beggar. And as for the babies, there's something very special about them that I need to investigate, replied Jason, his firm voice leaving no room for contestation as he passed Dorothy and entered the mansion, followed by Valerie, who lowered her eyes before the glacial gaze of the older woman. In the following hours, Jason personally took care of accommodating Valerie and the babies in the most comfortable guest room of the mansion, adjacent to his own room. After a few days of apparent tranquility, routine began to establish itself. Jason needed to briefly absent himself for an urgent meeting with his lawyer about the documents found. He trusted in the security of his house and the staff who had worked for him for years. However, he didn't know that Dorothy had already planted people of her confidence among the team. He left specific instructions that no one except the nanny chosen by him should enter the children's room during his absence. He ordered the maids to provide everything necessary for the little ones: cribs, clothes, diapers, food, while Valerie observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. The girl, accustomed to the harshness of the streets, couldn't understand why a man so rich and powerful would be so interested in helping them, especially considering the evident hostility of his stepmother. "Why are you doing all this for us, Mr. Jason? Nobody has ever cared. People always look through us as if we were invisible. There are days when I scream for help in the streets, and no one even slows down," asked Valerie as she watched Jason carefully adjusting one of the babies in the newly assembled crib, his fingers gently touching the small star-shaped mark on the child's wrist. Jason sat on the edge of the bed where Valerie was resting, exhausted after days of tension at the hospital and the excitement of arriving at the mansion. His strong hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he considered how to explain his thoughts to the girl who, despite her young age, demonstrated a wisdom that only adversity could teach. "I believe these babies may have a connection to me, Valerie. The mark they have on their wrist is identical to the one a very special person from my past had. Someone who mysteriously disappeared for some time. Caroline was her name, a talented artist of humble origin, but with a spirit so free and genuine that it completely won me over. We were from different worlds, but we fell madly in love," Jason confessed, his eyes losing themselves in memories. "Did she leave without saying goodbye? How could anyone leave a good person like you?" questioned Valerie, the innocence of her question contrasting with the complexity of the situation. As night fell over the mansion and Valerie finally fell asleep next to the babies, Jason retreated to his office, an imposing room decorated with dark woods and walls covered with books. He poured himself a generous dose of whiskey, letting the amber liquid burn his throat as he tried to organize his thoughts. The relationship with Caroline had been intense but brief, only 6 months of overwhelming passion that ended with her sudden disappearance. She simply didn't show up for a date, and all attempts at contact were fruitless. His small apartment was empty, as if she had never existed. At the time, he believed she had been frightened by the intensity of their relationship, or that the social difference between them had become an insurmountable obstacle. But now, with these babies who carried Caroline's unique mark, a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. What if she was pregnant when she disappeared? What if someone purposely took her away from me? My God, if these babies are my children. If someone separated Caroline from me and then abandoned our children, he muttered to himself, anger and pain mixing in his chest as he turned on the television to try to distract himself. The evening news filled the room with its bluish glow, but Jason barely paid attention until a specific report completely captured his attention. A segment about missing persons. As if by a cruel twist of fate, the face that appeared on the screen was exactly the one that populated his thoughts at that moment. Caroline, with her expressive eyes and captivating smile, in an official missing person photograph. The presenter reported that the young artist had disappeared more than a year ago, leaving behind 2 newborn twin babies who were also missing. Police suspected kidnapping, but the case had gone cold due to lack of concrete evidence. When the photos of the babies appeared on the screen, the whiskey glass slipped from Jason's fingers, shattering on the floor. They were unmistakably the same babies now sleeping in the guest room of his mansion. My God, it's them. My children. Caroline was pregnant when she disappeared. Someone took her away from me. Someone who didn't want these babies to be part of my life, he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion and the growing anger that began to boil in his blood. With determined steps and his heart pounding in his chest, Jason headed to Dorothy's quarters. Disregarding the late hour, he knocked on the door forcefully, entering without waiting for permission. He found his stepmother sitting at the vanity, removing her makeup with meticulous movements, as if each gesture were a sacred ritual. What kind of invasion is this, Jason? Have you completely lost your sense of decorum by mixing with those miserable people? She questioned, her voice laden with disdain as she turned to face him. Without responding, Jason turned on the bedroom television, rewinding the recorded news to the report about Caroline and the missing babies. Throughout the broadcast, he carefully observed Dorothy's face, catching the brief flash of recognition and fear that crossed her eyes before she could recompose her mask of indifference. You knew, didn't you? You knew about Caroline, about the babies. Are you involved in this, Dorothy? Answer me, demanded Jason, approaching his stepmother dangerously, who stood up in a sudden movement, knocking over pots of cream and expensive perfumes. Dorothy quickly regained her composure, adjusting her silk robe as if nothing had happened. Her face, still beautiful despite her age, transformed into a mask of offended innocence. How dare you accuse me of something so absurd, Jason? I've never seen this woman in my life. If she abandoned those children, she probably had her reasons. And honestly, you should think twice before bringing these babies into our home. What if they carry diseases? What if this disappearance story is a fraud, and the police come knocking on our door accusing you of kidnapping? Argued Dorothy, trying to change the subject, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying her nervousness. I'm not asking for your opinion on my decision to shelter them, Dorothy. I'm asking if you know anything about Caroline's disappearance. Because these babies have the same birthmark as her, and the mathematical probability of this being a coincidence is almost zero. They are my children, Dorothy, blood of my blood. Declared Jason, his voice rising as his suspicions grew in the face of his stepmother's defensive reaction. Unable to believe Dorothy's denial, Jason decided to investigate on his own. Taking advantage of his stepmother's departure for her daily social commitment, a charity tea, where she pretended interest in social causes while displaying her expensive jewelry to other socialites, Jason invaded her private office, a room that had always been closed to him, despite being the legal owner of the mansion. With skill acquired from years managing confidential information, he forced open the lock of the antique desk and began to meticulously search through each drawer, each folder, each envelope. It was in the last drawer, hidden under a false bottom, that he found a folder with partially burned documents, as if someone had tried to destroy them in haste and been interrupted. Even scorched, the papers revealed disturbing information: payment receipts to a private clinic, notes about Caroline's location, and most shocking, a detailed plan to permanently remove her, signed by Dorothy and her father Richard. So that's it. They found out about Caroline, about the pregnancy. They planned everything to keep her away from me, to prevent my children from claiming part of the fortune. These monsters. They separated a mother from her children, destroyed families out of greed, muttered Jason, fury growing inside him like an uncontrollable storm as he held the documents with trembling hands. Determined to expose the truth and bring the guilty to justice, Jason carefully gathered the documents, photographing each page with his cell phone as insurance. Then he headed to the phone to contact his trusted lawyer, and after that the police authorities. He was about to dial when he heard a muffled scream coming from the hallway. Dropping the phone, he ran toward the sound, his heart racing with a terrible premonition. That's when he saw Valerie collapsed in the middle of the hallway, her small body trembling as she struggled to breathe. "Valerie! My God, what happened?" shouted Jason, kneeling beside the girl and carefully lifting her head. With a final spasm, Valerie opened her eyes, fixing her terrified gaze on Jason before completely losing consciousness. "Help. The babies," were her last words before fainting in his arms, her pale skin contrasting frighteningly with the dark marble floor. With Valerie in his arms, Jason ran to the room where he had left the babies, only to find the cribs empty. Panic took over as he shouted the names he had provisionally given to the little ones, turning over the blankets as if they might be hidden there. That's when he noticed the folded paper on the bedside table. With trembling hands, he unfolded the note written in fine, elegant handwriting that he immediately recognized. "If you want to see your children alive again, don't involve the police." Jason's world crumbled in that instant, the cruel reality crushing him like a giant wave. His suspicions were correct, but the price of discovery could be the lives of his newly found children and little Valerie, who lay unconscious in his arms, poisoned, an innocent victim of a war she didn't even understand. "I will find them, I swear on Caroline's memory." The ambulance arrived quickly and took Valerie to the hospital where doctors confirmed the poisoning, although less severe than it initially appeared. Jason was torn between staying with the girl or immediately beginning the search for the babies. While at the hospital with Valerie, he received an anonymous call. "Your stepmother has already removed the girl. If you want everyone alive, follow alone." Running back to the hospital, Jason discovered that a woman with apparently official documents had transferred Valerie for specialized treatment. At that moment, he understood that Dorothy had orchestrated everything: the poisoning, the kidnapping of the babies, and now Valerie's disappearance from the hospital. With everyone under his stepmother's power, he needed to act with extreme caution. "And when I find them, whoever did this will pay dearly." Very dearly, Jason swore, tears of anger streaming down his face as he desperately called for help, the crumpled note in his hand like a silent promise of revenge. The ambulance departed carrying an unconscious Valerie, while Jason remained paralyzed in the middle of the empty room, the threatening note still crumpled in his trembling hand. The empty crib seemed to silently accuse him, as if he had failed in his promise to protect those innocent children. For a few moments, the millionaire was torn between following the ambulance to ensure Valerie's condition or immediately beginning the search for the missing babies. The decision was made when his gaze fell upon the portrait of his adoptive father, Richard, on the wall, that austere man who had always treated him with a cold distance disguised as formal education. The pieces were beginning to fit together in his mind, revealing a puzzle of betrayal and greed that transcended any evil he had witnessed in his years in the competitive business world. "I won't follow the rules of this sick game you've created. You wanted to deprive me of my children, separate a mother from her babies, and now you poison an innocent child. This will not go unpunished," he muttered to the portrait, as a solemn promise. At that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would not trust the police, who could be easily manipulated by his adoptive father's money and influence. He needed someone who operated in the shadows, someone relentless and discreet. Michael Sanders was considered the best private detective in the region, a former police officer who had left the force after discovering widespread corruption within the department. Jason had met him years before, when he needed to investigate a case of industrial espionage against his company, and knew he could trust the man's discretion and efficiency. Within an hour after the baby's disappearance, Michael was already in the mansion's office, his face marked by scars showing a grave expression as he analyzed the partially burned documents that Jason had found. "This goes beyond a family dispute, Mr. Jason. What we have here is kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Your adoptive father and stepmother planned this for a long time, probably since they discovered your relationship with that young woman, Caroline," concluded the detective after meticulously examining each fragment of paper. "They used private investigators to follow her, intercepted her communications. When they discovered the pregnancy, they decided it was time to act. They couldn't allow new children with legitimate right to the family fortune to be born. According to these documents, they kept her in captivity throughout her pregnancy, probably in some isolated family property, and planned to disappear her after childbirth," said Michael, hesitating before completing the sentence. "Disappear? You mean murder her? Speak clearly, Michael. I need to know exactly what we're facing," demanded Jason, his face contorted into a mask of fury and despair as he paced back and forth in the office. Michael worked tirelessly for the next 48 hours, mobilizing a network of contacts that included everyone from doormen and domestic employees to property registry officials and doctors who might have treated Caroline during her captivity. Meanwhile, Jason divided his time between the hospital where Valerie fought for her life. The poison had been potent enough to cause significant damage to her small body, and the mansion, where he obsessively searched for any clue he might have missed. It was during one of these searches that he found, hidden in a secret compartment in his adoptive father's office, a small leather-bound address book. Among the many names and locations noted in Richard's meticulous handwriting, one caught his attention: a mountain farm, marked simply as special security. "I've never heard of this property, and I know all the family investments," thought Jason, immediately photographing the page and sending it to Michael. The detective's response came in minutes. "Found it. The farm is registered under a shell company controlled by your father. There are records of regular deliveries of medical supplies and food there for the past 2 years. I also managed to track substantial payments to a doctor whose license was revoked for unethical practices. Everything indicates that's where they kept Caroline. I'm on my way there now. Meet me at the coordinates I sent. And come armed, mister." "Jason, we don't know what we'll find there," the message said, making Jason's heart race with a mixture of hope and fear. "Caroline, after so long I'll finally find her. But in what condition? What did they do to the mother of my children?" He asked himself as he picked up the gun he kept locked in his safe for personal protection, something he never imagined he would use against his own family. The mountain farm was an imposing and somber construction, surrounded by a dense forest that completely isolated it from the outside world. When Jason arrived at the agreed meeting point, he found Michael crouched behind some rocks, observing the property through binoculars. There are at least 4 armed men patrolling the perimeter, all with military equipment. "This is not a farm, mister." "Jason, it's a high-security prison in disguise," the detective informed in a low voice, passing the binoculars so Jason could see for himself. Through the lenses, he observed the main house and annexes, all with barred windows and visible security systems. The blood froze in his veins as he realized the magnitude of what his family had done. It wasn't just a scheme to get rid of Caroline and the babies, it was an elaborate and expensive operation, planned down to the smallest detail. "She's in there, I'm sure of it. I can feel it, Michael." "But how are we going to get in without putting her at risk?" questioned Jason, anxiety showing in every word. "I have a plan," replied the detective, revealing the details of a risky strategy that would require perfect timing and nerves of steel. "It's too dangerous, Michael. If something goes wrong, Caroline could end up hurt in the process," objected Jason, unable to bear the idea of causing more suffering to the one who had already been through so much because of him. "We have no choice, Mr. Jason. Every minute is precious, Mr. Jason. Besides, I discovered that they intend to resolve everything definitively today, and we can't waste time asking for reinforcements or developing a safer plan," argued Michael, his face showing the gravity of the situation. "Resolving the situation? You mean—" Jason began, unable to complete the sentence. "Yes, sir, I believe they intend to eliminate all witnesses and evidence." "We need to act now," confirmed the detective, loading his gun with a somber click that seemed to echo in the quiet of the forest. The invasion of the farm was a precise and brutal operation. Michael, utilizing his skills as an ex-tactical police officer, silently neutralized 2 guards, while Jason, following his instructions to the letter, disabled the security system using codes that the detective had obtained through a former employee of the company that had installed the equipment. Moving like shadows across the property, they reached the main house without being detected. Inside the residence, the smell of antiseptic and medications was strong, giving the place more of a hospital atmosphere than a home. Following the main corridor, they reached a door locked with an advanced electronic system. "It's here. According to the blueprint I got, this is the master bedroom converted into a kind of medical suite," whispered Michael, working quickly to unlock the door. When they finally managed to open it, the scene they found paralyzed Jason. Lying on a hospital bed connected to monitors and with an intravenous in her arm was Caroline. Thinner and paler than he remembered, Her once vibrant face now had a vacant expression, her open eyes staring at the ceiling without really seeing. "My God, Caroline, what have they done to you?" muttered Jason, approaching slowly, fearing she might disappear like a mirage if he moved too quickly. "She's sedated, Mr. Jason." "Look at all these controlled medications," observed Michael, examining the vials on the nightstand. "They're keeping her drugged so she doesn't try to escape again or make contact with the outside world. It's inhumane, but at least she's alive," the detective added, checking the young woman's vital signs with genuine concern on his scarred face. "Caroline, it's me, Jason. I've come to get you, my love. I know about our children. I know what my family did. Please come back to me," pleaded Jason, holding Caroline's inert hand between his, tears flowing freely down his face as the reality of the situation hit him with full force. He had lost 2 precious years of her life, 2 years he could have spent beside the woman he loved, and the children he didn't even know he had. Under Michael's guidance, who had basic medical knowledge acquired during his police service, Jason helped carefully remove the intravenous and monitoring equipment. They wrapped Caroline in blankets to protect her from the night cold, and Jason carried her in his arms, her fragile body weighing much less than he remembered. "We need to be quick now, Mr. Jason. The guards will make their rounds in approximately 10 minutes, and when they discover that 2 of their men are missing, they'll sound the alarm," warned Michael, leading the way back out of the property. The escape was tense, with Jason carrying Caroline while Michael secured the path, his gun always ready to respond to any threat. When they finally reached the vehicle, they had hidden a few hundred meters from the farm. Jason accommodated Caroline in the back seat with extreme care, as if she were a porcelain doll that could break at any moment. "Where do we go now?" "We can't take her to a regular hospital. They would notify the authorities. And my father has enough influence to cause problems," asked Jason, his mind working frantically to find a safe place. "I have a contact, a trusted doctor who works at a discreet clinic. He can care for her while we figure out what they did and how to reverse the effects of the drugs," responded Michael, accelerating the car down the winding road that descended the mountain. "And what about my children, Michael? And Valerie?" "We need to find them before it's too late," insisted Jason, torn between the joy of having found Caroline and the anguish of knowing his children were still in danger. "One thing at a time, Mr. Jason. Now that we have Caroline, we can obtain valuable information as soon as she's lucid. Besides, I've already put trusted men watching your stepmother. She will lead us to the children, I'm sure," assured the detective, his confident tone bringing slight comfort to Jason, who kept his eyes fixed on Caroline as if fearing she might vanish at any moment. In the small private clinic on the outskirts of the city, Dr. Reynolds, Michael's personal friend, cared for Caroline with exemplary dedication. After detailed analyses, he concluded that she had been kept under the effect of potent psychoactive drugs that affected her memory and consciousness, keeping her in a state of confusion and lethargy that prevented her from escaping or communicating coherently. With proper treatment, she should recover gradually. Physically, she's malnourished and weak, but there's no permanent damage. Mentally, however, the trauma of what she lived through may leave deep scars, the doctor explained to Jason, who wouldn't leave Caroline's side, observing her every small movement as a precious sign of recovery. During the first 24 hours, she oscillated between periods of unconsciousness and moments of confused lucidity, in which she looked around fearfully without recognizing where she was or who the people around her were. It was on the morning of the second day that the first real connection occurred. Jason was sitting beside the bed, holding her hand and telling her stories of when they were together, when suddenly she squeezed his fingers and sighed. "Jason?" she murmured, her voice so low he almost didn't hear. "Yes, it's me, my love. I'm here and I'll never let them take you from me again," he responded, leaning in to better see her eyes, which for the first time seemed truly focused. "The babies. Our babies. They took them, Jason. You need to find them before it's too late," Caroline implored, tears streaming down her face as she tried to sit up, only to fall back onto the pillows due to weakness. "Easy now, we'll find them. I already know they're my children. I've seen the little star-shaped marks on their wrists. They were with me briefly, but they were taken. I need you to tell me everything you know, Caroline. "So we can bring them back?" Jason asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the emotional storm consuming him inside. In the moments of lucidity that followed, Caroline revealed the horror she had endured, how Dorothy had approached her pretending friendship, only to drug her and take her to that isolated farm where she spent her entire pregnancy in captivity, constantly monitored by unscrupulous doctors. She told how she had heard Dorothy and Richard discussing her fate after the birth. She would be eliminated, and the babies would be sent far away for an international adoption that would prevent any chance of Jason ever finding them. But I managed to escape Jason. After the twins were born, I pretended to be more sedated than I really was. For weeks, I secretly reduced the medication doses, hiding the pills under my tongue. When I finally had enough strength, I took advantage of a moment when the guards were careless and fled with the babies. I walked through the forest for days, feeding them as best I could, hiding from anyone who might be looking for us, Caroline narrated, her voice choked with emotion and the effort of remembering details that the drugs had tried to erase from her memory. I found an abandoned house and hid there. I only went out to find food, always leaving the babies hidden. It was during one of these outings that they captured me again. I fought with all my strength, Jason, but there were too many of them. My last thought before losing consciousness was that I would never see my children again, that they would be left alone in that house until they died, she confessed, sobbing uncontrollably while Jason embraced her, feeling each tremor of her fragile body like a knife in his own heart. The girl, Valerie, found them. She cared for them for months, as if they were her siblings. She saved them, my love. And now we need to save them again, said Jason, his determination growing with each word as he mentally traced his next step in that battle that had become much more than a family dispute. It was a fight for the lives of the people he loved. The plan took shape quickly after the conversation with Caroline. While she recovered her strength in the clinic, protected by Michael's trusted men, Jason and the detective coordinated an operation to locate the babies and Valerie, who had mysteriously disappeared from the hospital where she was admitted. The information obtained by the men watching Dorothy was crucial. She had made several calls to an old family property, a vacation home that hadn't been officially used for years. It's a perfect place to hide the children temporarily. Isolated enough so nobody can hear baby cries, but close enough to the city to facilitate escape if necessary, analyzed Michael, showing aerial photos of the property to Jason. My informants confirmed unusual movement there in the last 24 hours, including delivery of infant supplies and the presence of a private nurse known for her discretion and lack of scruples. There are also reports of a sick child being taken there, probably Valerie, who must have survived the poisoning thanks to quick medical intervention, explained the detective, his unwavering professionalism contrasting with Jason's growing anxiety. How long to organize the rescue? Asked Jason, already heading for the door, unable to bear the thought of his children and Valerie spending another minute in the hands of those who had demonstrated such cruelty. We need at least 6 hours to ensure all angles are covered, Mr. Jason. If we act hastily, we may put the children at even greater risk. Dorothy is a desperate woman now, and desperate people commit atrocities when cornered, warned Michael, placing his hand on Jason's shoulder in a rare gesture of empathy. 6 hours then? Not a minute more. And Michael, I want to be on the front line. They're my children, my responsibility, declared Jason, his tone leaving no room for argument. As you wish, sir. But remember that this is not just about rescuing the children, but also securing evidence against your stepmother and your father. We need to be meticulous, agreed the detective, resuming preparations with renewed urgency. Michael explained what he had discovered. According to my informants, Dorothy had Valerie transferred from the hospital using falsified medical transfer documents. The girl was taken directly to the summer house, where the babies are also being kept. Dorothy is growing desperate. She lost Caroline, whom we managed to rescue, and knows it's only a matter of time until we find her too. Cornered people commit extreme acts, Mr. Jason. We need to be quick but cautious. When night fell, the operation was ready to begin. Jason, dressed entirely in black with a bulletproof vest under his clothes, Michael's insistence, positioned himself with the detective and 2 of his most trusted men near the summer house. Through night vision binoculars, they observed the movement inside the property. Lights on only on the 2nd floor, a female silhouette that certainly belonged to Dorothy moving restlessly from one room to another, and occasionally the distant sound of infant crying confirming the baby's presence. There are only 2 visible guards positioned at the main entrance and the back. Security is much more relaxed than at the farm, probably because they consider this a temporary location, observed Michael, meticulously analyzing every detail. We'll enter through the back, neutralizing the guards silently. My men will secure the perimeter while the 2 of us go up to the 2nd floor. Remember, Mr. Jason, your priority is the children. I'll handle Dorothy, instructed the detective, checking his weapon one last time before giving the signal to begin the approach. Michael, I want Dorothy alive. She needs to face justice for what she did, and we need her to implicate my father. No matter what she says or does, don't let anger get the better of you, asked Jason, surprising himself with his own ability to think rationally despite the fury boiling in his blood. Don't worry, sir. I'm too professional to let emotions interfere with my work. And believe me, seeing her spend the rest of her life in prison will be a much more satisfying revenge than any more permanent alternative, assured Michael, his cold smile sending a chill down Jason's spine, who suddenly felt grateful to have this relentless man on his side, and not as an enemy. The invasion of the house occurred with military precision. The guards were neutralized without alarm, allowing Jason and Michael to enter the property without alerting Dorothy. Inside the house, the tension was palpable as they silently climbed the stairs leading to the 2nd floor, each step calculated to avoid any noise that might betray their presence. Following the sound of muffled voices, they reached a corridor where a partially opened door revealed light and movement. Positioning themselves strategically, Michael gave the signal and both entered the room simultaneously, Jason in front, with the detective covering his rear. The scene they found would forever be etched in Jason's memory. Dorothy, with an expression of pure hatred, was leaning over one of the cribs with a threatening posture that made Jason's heart freeze. In the corner of the room, Valerie was tied to a chair, gagged but with wide, alert eyes, clearly having survived the poisoning, and in the cribs, the twins cried, restless, as if they sensed the imminent danger. "Get away from my children right now, Dorothy," ordered Jason, his voice thundering for the first time with an authority that made his stepmother instinctively back away. "Your children? Do you really think they deserve to carry our family's surname? Children of a street artist, a nobody you chose over your own blood," spat Dorothy, her face contorted into a mask of contempt as she slowly moved away from the cribs, still holding the pillow that revealed her dark intentions. "You're sick, you and my father. You kept Caroline captive throughout her pregnancy, planned to kill her and give my children up for adoption. And for what? For money? For a fortune that's already larger than anyone could spend in a lifetime?" questioned Jason, cautiously advancing across the room while Michael moved to free Valerie, always keeping a watchful eye on Dorothy. The confrontation that followed revealed the whole truth in its absolute rawness. Cornered and with no way out, Dorothy finally dropped her mask of respectability, revealing the monster behind the facade of a refined socialite. "Your father never wanted you, Jason. Never. You were just the son of a maid he had an affair with. He only acknowledged you because your mother threatened him, saying she would go to the press. And when she died in that tragic accident, it was a relief to him," shouted Dorothy, her voice loaded with venom as she paced around the room like a caged animal. "But then you grew up, became successful on your own merit, expanded the business beyond what Richard ever achieved. And he saw that he had created his own executioner, someone who would one day inherit everything and probably discover his dirty business, his secret accounts, his crimes," she continued, laughing hysterically, as if the whole situation were a cosmic joke in poor taste. "When I found out about your romance with that insignificant artist, I saw the perfect opportunity. I convinced Richard that if you had children with her, you would lose any focus on business, perhaps even divide the fortune with an inferior family. It was so easy to manipulate him. Richard never accepted that you, the son of his maid, could be better than him. The plan was simple. Remove Caroline during the pregnancy, give the babies up for international adoption, and eliminate her after the birth. You would never know you had children and would continue to be the obedient heir that Richard could control. But that damned woman was stronger than she seemed. She managed to escape with the babies." We had to hire dozens of people to discreetly search for them, and when we finally recaptured her, the children had disappeared, confessed Dorothy, each word a dagger in Jason's heart, who listened in horror to the extent of the evil planned against him and his family. And what was the final plan, Dorothy? Why keep Caroline alive if you wanted to eliminate her from the beginning? Asked Jason, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotional storm devastating him inside. Insurance, my dear stepson. Insurance. As long as we had her, we could control her if things went wrong. And then, that stupid beggar found your precious children and brought them directly to you. It was as if fate was conspiring against us. But we still had an ace up our sleeve. If you found out about Caroline and the babies, we would eliminate all of you in a tragic family accident. And the fortune would return entirely to Richard, revealed Dorothy, her cold smile showing that she had absolutely no remorse for her actions or intentions. It would never work, Dorothy. You and my father are amateurs trying to play a game for professionals. I have copies of all the documents I found, witnesses who saw what you did, and now your own confession. It's over, declared Jason, approaching the cribs and finally taking one of the babies in his arms, feeling the small body immediately calm at his touch, as if recognizing the father even after so little time together. No, Jason, you don't understand. It never ends for people like Richard. He has connections everywhere, police, justice, politics. Why do you think we didn't involve the authorities when that beggar woman stole your children? Because we knew you would eventually find them, and then we would have the opportunity to eliminate all threats at once, shouted Dorothy, her composure finally breaking completely as she tried to lunge at Jason, only to be stopped by Michael, who immobilized her with professional efficiency. The arrival of the police, discreetly called by one of Michael's men, marked the end of that night of revelations. Dorothy was taken away, still shouting threats and accusations, while Valerie, finally free from her restraints, ran to embrace Jason, tears of relief streaming down her childish face. I knew you would come, Mr. Jason. Even when she said you had abandoned us, I knew it wasn't true, sobbed the girl, clinging to him as if she feared everything was just a dream about to vanish. I would never abandon you, Valerie. You brought my children to me, saved their lives. Now it's my turn to save yours. You'll never have to go back to the streets, promised Jason, holding a baby in each arm while Valerie snuggled at his side, forming an unlikely but perfectly harmonious picture. The following hours were a whirlwind of police statements, medical examinations of the children to ensure they were well, and finally, the moment Jason most anticipated, taking the babies to meet their mother. And the reunion at the clinic where Caroline was recovering was charged with emotion. When she saw her babies after months of separation, a deep sob escaped her chest as she extended trembling arms to touch them, as if she couldn't believe they were real. The little ones, as if recognizing their mother's scent and voice, immediately calmed in her embrace. Jason observed the scene with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the true meaning of family as he watched Valerie timidly join the embrace, completing the circle of love that had formed against all odds. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when Jason rescued his children and reunited his family. The once cold and somber mansion now vibrated with childish laughter and the warmth of a true home. Sitting on the porch overlooking the garden where Caroline played with Valerie and the twins, now officially named Matthew and Sophie, Jason observed with a smile the scene he never imagined would be part of his life. Caroline had recovered completely, her artistic spirit flourishing again as she painted family portraits and transformed one of the mansion's rooms into a colorful and welcoming studio. Valerie, now formally adopted by Jason and Caroline, attended school for the first time and demonstrated surprising intelligence, absorbing knowledge like a thirsty sponge. The twins were taking their first steps with the determination they had inherited from their parents, falling and getting up without ever giving up. That vision was the balm Jason needed before the difficult day that awaited him, the beginning of the trial that would bring Richard and Dorothy face to face with their crimes. Look at what we've built together, Caroline, despite all their attempts to separate us. This family is our greatest victory, more valuable than any fortune they could try to take from me, commented Jason when his wife approached, enveloping his shoulders in a warm embrace. The path to this day had been arduous and filled with painful discoveries. Following the anonymous call he received the night of Dorothy's arrest, Jason hired the best investigators to uncover the truth about his biological mother's death, Grace. The evidence that emerged painted a picture of calculated cruelty that surpassed even Jason's worst suspicions. Documents recovered from sealed police archives, witnesses who finally had the courage to speak, and forensic analysis of preserved evidence revealed that the car accident that killed Grace had been meticulously planned by Richard. It was discovered that she, tired of the mistreatment and contempt, had gathered courage to flee with young Jason, taking with her documents proving her husband's money embezzlement and illegal businesses, her only guarantee of protection against his power and influence. Richard, alerted by a corrupt employee, sabotaged Grace's car brakes on the night planned for the escape. The vehicle plunged from a cliff on a deserted road, killing her instantly, while Jason, by a miracle of fate, was ejected from the vehicle and survived with only minor injuries. She died trying to save me from a monster I ended up calling father throughout my life, Jason confessed to Caroline one night, the tears finally falling after decades of containing the pain of a loss he hadn't even fully understood. Your mother got what she wanted, my love. You survived, grew strong, and now you will bring justice not only for her, but for everyone who suffered at that man's hands, Caroline replied, holding his hands firmly, her gaze conveying the strength he needed to face what would come next. The courtroom was packed when Jason, Caroline, and Michael entered that morning. Journalists jostled for privileged positions, while curious onlookers and influential high society families competed for the remaining seats, all eager to witness the scandal that was shaking the foundations of the region's economic power. In the defendant's dock, Richard maintained a rigid and arrogant posture, wearing an impeccable suit that contrasted with the handcuffs on his wrists, while Dorothy, seated a few meters away, seemed to have aged decades since her arrest, her once haughty face now marked by fear and resentment. When Richard's eyes met Jason's, there was no remorse in them, only a cold and calculating hatred that confirmed everything the investigators had discovered. The prosecutor opened the case with a forcefulness that silenced even the most discreet whispers from the audience. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case we present today is not just about kidnapping, attempted homicide, and premeditated murder. It's about the absolute perversion of family bonds, about a man who killed his wife, psychologically tortured his own son, kidnapped the mother of his grandchildren, and tried to eliminate his own descendants, all motivated by a greed that defies human understanding. The prosecutor's firm, grave voice echoed through the courtroom, while Jason squeezed Caroline's hand, seeking strength to relive the horrors that would be detailed in the coming days. We are here today not just for our children, but for my mother who can no longer speak for herself, and for every person they hurt in their relentless pursuit of power, Jason whispered to Caroline, determination emanating from every word. Over 3 exhausting weeks, the courtroom became the stage for devastating revelations that went far beyond the crimes against Jason's family. Witnesses emerged one after another, recounting how Richard had built his empire through extortion, bribery of public officials, exploitation of vulnerable workers, and money laundering on an international scale. Former employees, now protected by promises of immunity, revealed how they were forced to participate in fraudulent schemes under threat of losing their jobs or worse. An accountant who had worked for the family for decades presented parallel ledgers, documenting millions in transfers to tax havens, evidencing a hidden fortune that far exceeded the publicly known assets. When it was Jason's turn to testify, his voice did not tremble as he recounted growing up under Richard's psychological control, how he was manipulated to believe his worth was only in his ability to expand the family business, and how his attempt to find genuine happiness with Caroline was brutally sabotaged. He not only tried to deprive me of true love, but attempted to erase my children's existence, as if they were an error to be corrected, a threat to his absolute control over the fortune that, ironically, I helped multiply with my own work, Jason declared, looking directly at Richard as he spoke. Throughout my life, I sought approval from this man who posed as my father, never understanding that what he felt for me wasn't love or pride, but fear. Fear that one day I would discover the truth about who he really was, he concluded, feeling as if a weight of decades finally began to dissipate from his shoulders. The defense strategy became evident on the 5th day of the trial. Richard and his lawyers systematically attempted to transfer all blame to Dorothy, portraying her as the manipulative mind behind each crime. They claimed that she, driven by sick jealousy and excessive ambition, had orchestrated Caroline's disappearance, the kidnapping of the babies, and Valerie's poisoning without Richard's knowledge or consent. Jason's stepmother, already shaken by her husband's abandonment during preventive detention, observed with growing indignation the allegations that transformed her into the sole villain of the story. The final blow came when Richard's attorney presented a falsified document, supposedly signed by Dorothy, taking full responsibility for the crimes. In that moment, something broke inside her. Decades of toxic loyalty and criminal complicity gave way to unthinking fury. Rising abruptly, Dorothy interrupted the process with a shout that silenced the courtroom. "Enough lies! I was loyal to you for 30 years, Richard, and this is how you reward me, making me your scapegoat while you try to escape unpunished." Her lawyer tried to restrain her, but it was too late. The floodgate of secrets had been broken, and there was no way to contain the flood. "If I'm going down, you're going down with me. I won't carry alone the weight of crimes we planned together." She vociferated, trembling with anger while pointing an accusatory finger at her husband. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you want to know the truth? Richard killed Grace with his own hands, sabotaging her car brakes. He told me everything on our wedding night, boasting about how clever he had been in getting rid of her without raising suspicions," revealed Dorothy, ignoring the desperate pleas of her lawyer to remain silent. Dorothy's confession resulted in a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she would provide information about Richard's crimes and evidence she had kept as insurance. Through her testimony, a portrait of Richard's calculated cruelty emerged. She described the meticulous planning of Grace's death and how he celebrated while little Jason recovered in the hospital. He toasted to her death, saying he was finally free to shape his son without interference from that ambitious maid, Dorothy reported, staring fixedly at Jason. "Your mother loved you deeply." She kept a diary that Richard forced me to burn, where she wrote how you were her light and how she would do anything for you to grow up free from your father's toxic influence. Her plan was to take you to another city, to start over with the portion of the fortune that rightfully belonged to her. She didn't want the wealth for herself, but to ensure your education and opportunities, she revealed, tears streaming down her face, aged by the weight of guilt. The accounts revealed by Dorothy unveiled an empire of corruption greater than imagined. In tax havens, Richard had hidden more than half of his fortune, derived from dealings with drug traffickers, companies that destroyed indigenous communities, and slave labor networks. During the process, he remained unshaken until the judge announced the sentence: life imprisonment and confiscation of all illicit assets. "You're nothing but ungrateful. I raised you, gave you my name and fortune, and this is how you repay me?" He shouted as he was dragged out. Jason observed with surprising calmness, "You never gave me anything but lies, Richard. The only legacy you tried to leave me was greed and cruelty. But you failed because the blood that runs in me is Grace's, and she won in the end." He responded with sadness for the life he could have had. "I hope each day in prison reminds you that everything you killed for only brought you a solitary cell," he concluded, turning his back and walking toward his true family. Dorothy received a reduced sentence of 20 years in exchange for her cooperation. When she was let out of the courtroom, her eyes met Jason's, and something resembling remorse crossed her gaze. "The real punishment isn't prison, Jason. It's living knowing that I spent my life chasing wealth, only to end up with nothing, while you found what truly matters: love, family, purpose," she confessed. "Take care of them. Don't make my mistakes, sacrificing people for things," she added before being led to the police vehicle. Jason nodded silently, not with forgiveness, but with the recognition that justice had been done. "I think this is the most appropriate punishment for her, observing our happiness from afar, knowing that the fortune she coveted will help the people she always despised," he commented, embracing Caroline. "Our victory isn't seeing them suffer, but building something beautiful from the ashes they left," she responded, her wisdom illuminating Jason's path. 3 months after the trial, the Grace Foundation opened its doors in a restored historic building. Using part of the money recovered from Richard's secret accounts, The foundation was born with the mission of helping abandoned children and vulnerable mothers. The project included shelters, medical assistance, educational and training programs, all to break the cycle of poverty. On the day of the inauguration, Jason watched emotionally the courtyard where dozens of children played. By his side was Valerie, holding his speech and Sophie's hand while Matthew clung to his father's leg. "Did you know my mother dreamed of being a teacher? She believed education was the path to freedom," Jason commented. "Then we're fulfilling her dream, aren't we? Mrs. Grace would be proud of what we're doing," Valerie responded with surprising wisdom. "Yes, little one, and she would be deeply proud of the amazing granddaughter she has in you," confirmed Jason, hugging the girl who had become an essential part of his family. Jason's speech at the inauguration was brief but powerful, focusing on the hope that the future represented for the families that would be helped by the foundation. When he passed the microphone to Valerie, a respectful silence took over the audience. Everyone knew the story of the little beggar who had saved the babies. With surprising confidence, Valerie shared her experience on the streets and how fate had changed her life. "Many times I thought I was born just to suffer, that I would never know a real family. Today I know that every difficult step led me exactly where I should be, alongside people who teach me that family is not just blood, but choice and unconditional love," she declared with an emotional voice. "Every child deserves to be loved. Every family deserves the chance to stay together. This is the purpose of the Grace Foundation, transforming pain into hope," she concluded, provoking applause while Caroline hugged her with maternal pride, tears of joy streaming down her face. At the end of the ceremony, Jason found a moment of quietude in a small internal garden. Sitting under a young tree planted in memory of Grace, he observed Caroline showing the art studio, Valerie guiding girls through the library, and the twins enchanting everyone with their smiles and the star-shaped mark on their wrists. A deep feeling of peace enveloped him, the serene peace of someone who has gone through the worst of the storm and finally found calm waters. "Mom, I hope you can see me. Your sacrifice meant something. I promise your legacy will live on through this foundation and through every life we can transform," he whispered to the breeze that moved the leaves of the tree. Caroline approached with their 3 children, extending her hand. "Shall we go, love? The children want to show the playground they helped design," she called with a radiant smile. Together they walked toward the future they had built, living proof that even from the darkest stories, the most beautiful dawns can be born. Did you like Jason and Valerie's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.